What if you stumbled across an old photograph, something dusty and cracked from 100 years ago, and the person staring back at you from that image was you, not someone who looked like you. You. Your exact face, your exact posture, that scar on your left hand that you got when you were 9 years old. We've all seen those internet posts comparing modern celebrities to old paintings and laughed them off as coincidence. But the cases you're about to hear go far beyond resemblance. These are 10 documented accounts of people who found photographs and film recordings of themselves in historical eras before they were ever born. And in every case, discovering that evidence destroyed them. Let's begin. Number 10. The Antique Shop Portrait. This case starts with something as simple as a weekend trip to an antique shop, and it ends with a woman who can no longer look at her own reflection without screaming. Once you hear what she found on that dusty shelf, you'll understand why. Imagine you're browsing through a cluttered antique store in Charleston, South Carolina on a Saturday afternoon in 2016. You pick up an old leather photo album because the binding catches your eye. You flip through faded portraits of strangers from the 1800s. The kind of photos where nobody smiles and everyone looks vaguely haunted. Then you turn a page and your stomach drops through the floor. That's exactly what happened to Vivian Calloway, a 31-year-old graphic designer who had no interest in the paranormal, no history of mental illness, and absolutely no explanation for what she was looking at. The photograph was a formal portrait dated 1881 on the back in faded ink. It showed a woman seated in a high-backed wooden chair, wearing a dark Victorian dress with white lace at the collar. The woman's face was Vivian's face. Not similar, identical. The same slightly asymmetrical eyes, the same narrow jaw, the same faint birthmark just below the left ear that Vivian had been self-conscious about her entire life. Vivian's hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped the album. She bought it immediately and spent the next 3 days comparing the photograph to every image of herself she could find. She used facial recognition software from her design work. The match was 99.7%, higher than the average person matches with their own driver's license photo. She tracked the album's provenance through the shop owner to an estate sale in Savannah, Georgia. The original owner was a family named Hargrove, who had lived in the region since before the Civil War. Vivian had no connection to Savannah, no relatives in Georgia at all. Her family was from Minnesota, going back 4 generations. But here's where things took a darker turn. Vivian became obsessed with the woman in the photograph. She dug through census records and church archives until she found a name. Eliza Hargrove, born 1854, died 1883 at the age of 29. Cause of death listed simply as madness. The more Vivian learned about Eliza, the more the parallels multiplied. Both were artists. Both were left-handed. Both had lost their mothers at age 12. Eliza had kept a journal, fragments of which survived in a university archive. In one entry dated March 1882, Eliza wrote something that made Vivian's blood run cold. She wrote, "I have seen my own face looking back at me from a place I cannot reach, a world of glass and light where people move like ghosts behind bright windows. I fear I am not alone inside my own skin." Vivian became convinced that Eliza was somehow seeing forward through time, just as Vivian was now looking backward. She believed they were the same consciousness occupying 2 bodies across a century and a half. She stopped sleeping. She stopped eating regularly. She began referring to herself as we instead of I. Her friends tried to intervene. Her therapist diagnosed her with depersonalization disorder. But Vivian insisted this wasn't a disorder. It was a discovery. She was remembering a life she had already lived, and the photograph was proof. In 2018, Vivian Calloway was admitted to a psychiatric facility after she was found surrounded by hundreds of printed copies of the 1881 photograph, each annotated with notes connecting Eliza's life to her own. She had stopped distinguishing between herself and a woman who had been dead for over a century. Did Vivian simply find an uncanny look-alike in an old photo album? Was it a coincidence stretched into obsession by a vulnerable mind? Or is there something deeper happening? Some thread connecting 2 women across 135 years that neither of them asked for? And here's the question that lingers. If Eliza could see Vivian's world of glass and light back in 1882, what exactly was she looking through? The next case involves footage that shouldn't exist at all. Number 9, the wedding reel. This case doesn't involve a single photograph. It involves moving footage, a 16mm film reel from 1943 that shows a man who wouldn't be born for another 39 years. And the man who found himself on that film never recovered from watching it. Imagine you're helping your elderly grandmother clean out her attic. She hands you a metal canister labeled Robert and Helen, June 1943. It's a wedding film, your grandparents' wedding, decades before you existed. You take it to a specialist to have it digitized because you want to surprise the family at Christmas. When the footage comes back, you watch it on your laptop expecting nothing but nostalgia. Grainy images of young people dancing, throwing rice, cutting cake. Then you see yourself standing in the background of your grandparents' wedding reception. Not someone who looks like you. You. Wearing clothes from 1943, but with your face, your build, that specific way you stand, with your weight shifted to your left leg. That's what happened to Thomas Adler in 2012, and what followed tore his life apart. Thomas was 30 years old, a high school history teacher living in Milwaukee. The footage was unmistakable. In 3 separate shots across the 11-minute wedding film, a man matching Thomas exactly appeared in the background. He wasn't posing. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was watching the ceremony from a distance, partially obscured by other guests, almost as if he was trying not to be noticed, but couldn't quite stay hidden. Thomas had the footage analyzed by 2 independent film experts. Both confirmed the film stock was authentic 1943 Kodak. There was no evidence of splicing, double exposure, or digital manipulation. The man in the background was physically present at that wedding in June of 1943. Thomas showed the footage to his grandmother Helen, who was 91 at the time and still sharp. Helen stared at the screen for a long time. Then she said something that made the entire room go silent. She said, "I remember him. He stood near the back. Nobody knew who he was. Robert asked around and nobody had invited him. We always assumed he was someone's cousin." Helen paused. Then she looked at Thomas and said, "He looked exactly like you. I've been thinking that since you were about 16, but I thought I was just getting old." Thomas became consumed by the footage. He watched it hundreds of times, freezing frames, zooming in, trying to find any difference between himself and the man at the wedding. He found none. The man even had a small scar on his right hand in the exact location where Thomas had cut himself, on a fence at age 7. He began researching every guest at the wedding, trying to identify the mystery man through other channels. He found nothing. The man appeared at the wedding, appeared on film, and vanished from history completely. Thomas started having dreams about 1943, vivid, detailed dreams about Milwaukee and wartime. He could describe streets and landmarks that no longer existed, but which he later verified through historical records. His wife became increasingly alarmed. Thomas stopped teaching and stopped leaving the house. He sat in front of his computer for 14 hours a day, watching the same 11 minutes of footage. He told his wife he needed to figure out how to get back there. Thomas Adler was diagnosed with a severe dissociative disorder in 2014. His wife filed for divorce. The last anyone heard from him, he was attempting to recreate the exact conditions of the wedding at the same location, the same time of year, the same music playing on a record player. Was the man in the footage really Thomas? Had he somehow traveled back to 1943 and attended his own grandparents' wedding? If so, why? And if Thomas is right that he's already been there, does that mean his journey backwards is inevitable, something that has already happened and is simply waiting for him to catch up? The next case takes us to a war zone where the evidence was captured on military film. Number 8. The Battlefield Photographer. This case involves official military footage from World War I, a conflict fought over 100 years ago. And the person who appears in that footage is a woman who was born in 1991. The footage has been authenticated by 3 separate institutions. None of them can explain what they're looking at. Imagine you're a graduate student researching archival military footage for your doctoral thesis on wartime photography. You've spent months in dusty archives, reviewing hundreds of hours of grainy black and white footage from the Western Front. The images are brutal, trenches and mud, and young men who look far too old for their age. Then you freeze a frame and the air leaves your lungs. Standing at the edge of a communication trench near Ypres in 1917, is a woman holding what appears to be a modern digital camera, and the woman's face is yours. That's what happened to Nadia Osman, a 26-year-old film studies student at the University of Edinburgh. and discovering that frame changed the entire trajectory of her life. The footage came from the Imperial War Museum's archive, catalogued and authenticated decades ago. The specific reel was shot by a British military cinematographer in August 1917 during the Third Battle of Ypres. In one brief sequence lasting approximately 4 seconds, a figure is visible at the edge of the frame. A woman standing upright among crouching soldiers, holding a small rectangular object to her eye in a posture unmistakably consistent with taking a photograph with a modern device. The figure's face is partially visible. Nadia ran it through every comparison tool available to her. The facial geometry matched her own with startling precision. When she brought the discovery to 3 independent analysts, each confirmed the figure was a real person physically present in the scene. One analyst noted something particularly disturbing. The woman's clothing didn't match 1917 at all. The visible fabric appeared to be modern synthetic material, completely inconsistent with anything available during the First World War. Nadia became obsessed. She obtained every frame from that reel and discovered 2 additional brief appearances of the same woman, each time holding the rectangular device. In every appearance, no one around her interacted with her or looked at her. It was as if she was invisible to everyone except the camera. Nadia began experiencing intrusive memories. She would suddenly recall the smell of cordite and wet earth. She developed an intimate knowledge of the Third Battle of Ypres that went far beyond her research, describing events she later verified through classified records she hadn't previously accessed. She became convinced that at some point in her future, she would travel back to 1917. The footage wasn't evidence of her past. It was evidence of her destiny. Her colleagues watched helplessly as she withdrew from her studies and her life, referring to soldiers by name as if she knew them personally. In 2019, Nadia dropped out of her doctoral program and disappeared. Her apartment was found empty except for a printout of the frozen frame from 1917, with a handwritten note on the back. It read, "I know when I'm supposed to be. I'm going to find my way there." Is Nadia Osman destined to travel back to the Western Front? Is the footage proof that she already has? And if she was there in 1917, invisible to everyone around her, what exactly was she documenting, and for whom? The next case involves evidence from an entirely different medium. Number 7. The Renaissance Canvas. This case doesn't involve film or photographs. It involves a 16th century oil painting hanging in a private collection in Florence, Italy. And the man depicted in it is a software engineer from Portland, Oregon, who wasn't born until 1988. Imagine receiving an email from a stranger in another country containing a photograph of a Renaissance painting. The stranger found you through a facial recognition database. They matched your social media photos to a figure in a painting completed in 1547. You open the attachment expecting a vague resemblance, the kind of thing people share for fun. Instead, you're looking at your own face rendered in oil paint nearly 500 years ago. Same bone structure, same expression, same distinctive cleft in your chin that you inherited from no one in your family because you were adopted and have no knowledge of your biological ancestry. That's what happened to Marcus Hale. And the rabbit hole it opened destroyed everything he thought he knew about himself. The painting was attributed to a minor Florentine artist working in the workshop of Bronzino. It depicted a gathering of merchants and scholars at a banquet. Among the figures, seated slightly apart from the main group, was a man who didn't belong. Art historians had noted him before. His clothing was subtly wrong for the period. His posture was modern, relaxed in a way that Renaissance subjects never were. He appeared to be observing the scene rather than participating in it. Marcus flew to Florence to see the painting in person. Standing in front of it, he said later, was like looking into a mirror that reflected the wrong century. Every feature was precise. The cleft chin, the slightly downturned left eye, even a small mole on the right cheekbone that Marcus could verify simply by touching his own face. The painting's owner allowed Marcus to commission a detailed analysis. Paint composition, canvas dating, and stylistic examination all confirmed the work was genuine, created between 1545 and 1550. The figure had been part of the original composition, not added later. Whoever this man was, the artist had painted him from life nearly 5 centuries ago. Marcus, who had been adopted at birth and knew nothing about his biological parents, became convinced the painting held answers about his origin. He began spending months in Florence, learning Italian, visiting every archive he could access. He found references to the figure in two historical documents. A letter from a Florentine merchant mentioned the strange quiet man who appeared at gatherings but spoke to no one and seemed to know the outcome of every negotiation before it concluded. A church record noted a foreigner who carried objects of unknown purpose and vanished from the city without explanation. Marcus's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He began claiming he could remember fragments of life in the 1540s, smells of wood smoke and river water, the sound of church bells at specific hours. Whether these were genuine memories or constructions of a mind under extreme stress, no psychologist could determine. Marcus Hale remains in Florence to this day, living in poverty, spending every waking hour in archives. He has told the few people who still speak to him that he's not searching for proof anymore, he's searching for instructions. He believes somewhere in the historical record, his past self left a message explaining how to travel back. Was the man in the painting really Marcus? If a Renaissance artist painted him from life, how did a man from 21st century Portland end up sitting at a Florentine banquet in 1547? And if Marcus has been there before, why can't he remember how he got there? The next case moves from paint to the earliest days of motion pictures. Number 6. The Edison footage. This case involves a fragment of film shot by Thomas Edison's studio in 1896, one of the earliest motion pictures ever created, and clearly visible in the background is a man who bears an impossible resemblance to someone who wouldn't exist for another 87 years. Imagine you're a film preservation specialist digitizing some of the oldest surviving footage in human history. These films are sacred artifacts, snippets of life from a world that vanished long ago. You've processed hundreds of them. Then one afternoon, as you're enhancing a brief street scene shot in New York in 1896, you notice a face in the crowd that makes you set down your coffee and lean closer to the monitor. The face belongs to a man who is staring directly at the camera. Unlike everyone else in the frame, who walks past with the distracted energy of a busy city, this man is still. He's watching the camera with full awareness of what it is, an awareness that nobody in 1896 should possess, because film cameras were brand new, and almost no one had ever seen one. Film archivist Daniel Yoon noticed this face in 2009. He almost scrolled past it. Then something tugged at him, a nagging recognition he couldn't place. He enlarged the frame. He enhanced it with every tool available. And then he realized why the face looked familiar. It was his own. The man in the 1896 footage was wearing a dark coat and hat, consistent with the era, but his face, enhanced and sharpened by modern technology, matched Daniel's with a precision that defied coincidence. Same wide-set eyes, same broad nose, same asymmetrical hairline. Daniel was Korean-American, and the figure in the footage, while dressed in Western clothing, had unmistakably East Asian features, which would have been notable enough in 1890s New York to draw comment. Yet no other documentation of this individual existed. Daniel spent 2 years quietly researching the footage. He had the film stock tested, authentic. He had facial geometry analysis performed by a forensic specialist who worked with law enforcement. The specialist's conclusion was unsettling. The probability of two unrelated individuals sharing this degree of facial similarity was less than 1 in 4 million. But Daniel also noticed something else. The man's right hand was visible in 2 frames. On the inside of his wrist was a mark, too precise to be a smudge on the film. Daniel had an identical mark on his own wrist, a scar from a surgery he'd had at age 11. Daniel kept his discovery private for years, but the knowledge changed him. He became withdrawn, developed insomnia, and reported hearing sounds at night that seemed to come from a different era. Horse hooves on cobblestone, the distant clatter of a trolley, voices calling out in accents that hadn't been spoken in over a century. His colleagues noticed the change. When he finally confided in a close friend, the friend suggested therapy. Daniel refused. He said therapy couldn't fix what was wrong with him, because what was wrong with him was that he'd seen proof of something the human mind wasn't designed to accept. In 2015, Daniel took an extended leave and traveled to New York, walking the exact streets where the 1896 footage had been filmed. His last known communication was an email from a public library in Lower Manhattan. It read, "I found the intersection. The buildings are different, but the ground remembers. I think the ground is how it works." Daniel Yoon has not been seen since. The next case involves evidence from the most unlikely source imaginable. Number 5. The daguerreotype twins. This case involves two identical daguerreotypes taken in 1853 and twin sisters who found them in 2017. The daguerreotypes show two women who aren't just similar to the twins. They are the twins. Same faces, same freckle patterns, same heterochromia in the same eye. And when one of the sisters tried to prove the photographs were fake, the evidence she uncovered drove her to a breakdown from which she never recovered. Imagine you're at an estate sale with your twin sister, picking through boxes of antique curiosities because it's how you spend rainy Sundays. Your sister pulls two small framed photographs from a box of tarnished silverware and holds them up side by side. They're daguerreotypes, the kind of early photographs that look like tiny mirrors when you tilt them. Each one shows a young woman, two young women who are clearly twins, two young women who are clearly you. That's what happened to Iris and Margot Sinclair in Savannah, Georgia. And discovering those daguerreotypes set into motion a chain of events that would permanently destroy one sister's mind and fundamentally alter the other's understanding of reality. Iris was the skeptic. A biochemist by training, she approached the discovery with clinical detachment. The photographs were interesting, perhaps valuable, certainly unusual. But she was confident that a rational explanation existed: genetic recurrence across generations. Coincidence amplified by the limited resolution of early photography. The human brain's tendency to find patterns where none exist. Margot was the opposite. She felt an immediate visceral connection to the women in the daguerreotypes. She said later that looking at those photographs felt less like discovery and more like remembering. Iris had the daguerreotypes examined by experts at the Smithsonian. The silver plates were authentic to the 1850s. The images had not been altered or recreated. These photographs were genuine, and the women in them were real people who had sat for a photographer approximately 164 years ago. The facial similarities went beyond what any expert could comfortably dismiss. Iris and the woman in her corresponding daguerreotype shared identical heterochromia, a rare condition where one eye is a different color from the other. Iris had a brown left eye and a green right eye. The woman in the 1853 photograph appeared to have exactly the same configuration. The probability of this occurring by chance in two unrelated individuals was astronomically small. Margot began researching the daguerreotypes obsessively. She traced them through auction records and estate inventories to a family named Beaumont, who had owned a plantation outside Savannah. She found death records for two sisters, Claire and Adelaide Beaumont, born 1831, both dead by 1858. The cause of death for both was listed as hysteria and self-harm. According to fragmentary family records, the Beaumont twins had become disturbed in the final years of their lives. Claire reportedly told a minister that she had seen visions of a world of moving pictures and metal carriages, and that she had seen herself in that world, older but unmistakable. Adelaide reportedly refused to look at mirrors, claiming her reflection showed a different room, a different century, a different life she was being pulled toward. When Iris read these accounts, something inside her clinical detachment began to crack. The parallels were too specific, too precise. She had always avoided mirrors in the morning, a quirk she had never examined or explained. Margot had experienced recurring dreams about a large white house surrounded by Spanish moss since childhood, dreams she had never connected to Savannah until now. Iris threw herself into debunking the connection. She had DNA analysis performed, comparing her own genetic markers to surviving Beaumont family descendants. The results showed no genetic relationship whatsoever. This should have been reassuring. Instead, it made everything worse. Because if there was no genetic link, there was no rational explanation for why two women from 1853 had their exact faces. Iris's psychological break was total. She began losing time, hours she couldn't account for. She became convinced that Claire Beaumont's consciousness was leaking into her own, that the daguerreotype had opened a channel between them that couldn't be closed. Margot handled the experience differently. She embraced it. She claimed she could feel Adelaide's presence like a warmth behind her eyes, a second perspective layered over her own. She said it wasn't frightening. It was like finally meeting someone she'd always known was there. Iris was institutionalized in 2019. She remains in care, alternating between periods of lucidity and episodes where she speaks in a dialect of English that linguists have identified as consistent with antebellum Southern speech patterns. Margot visits her weekly. She sits by her sister's bed and holds her hand. And sometimes she whispers things that only the two of them, and possibly two other women, 170 years removed, would understand. The next case involves surveillance footage from a place that should be impossible to access. Number 4. The airport tape. This case involves a security camera at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. The footage was recorded in 2007, and standing in the terminal, clearly visible, is a man who appears in a photograph taken at that exact same gate in 1959. Same face, same coat, same briefcase. And he hasn't aged a single day in 48 years. Imagine you're a security analyst reviewing routine surveillance footage from one of the busiest airports in the world. Thousands of faces pass through your screen every shift. Then you see one that makes you hit pause. Not because the man is doing anything suspicious, because you've seen him before, not in person, in a framed photograph hanging on the wall of the airport's administrative office, a promotional photo from 1959 showing the terminal's grand opening. That's what a TSA contractor reportedly experienced in 2011 while performing a routine audit of archive security footage, and the anomaly he discovered has never been publicly explained. The man appears in the 2007 footage for approximately 90 seconds. He walks into frame at gate B7, stands motionless for nearly a minute, looks directly up at the security camera as if he knows exactly where it is, then walks out of frame and doesn't appear on any other camera in the terminal. He arrived at the gate from nowhere and departed to nowhere. No boarding pass was scanned, no ticket was purchased. Security logs show no record of his entry or exit. When the contractor compared the man's face to the 1959 photograph, the match was absolute. Same angular features, same thin frame, same dark overcoat with a distinctive lapel pin, and critically, the same leather briefcase, monogrammed with the initials RK, visible in both the photograph and the security footage. The 1959 photograph had a caption identifying several attendees of the terminal opening. The man with the briefcase was listed as Raymond Keller, described as a consultant. No further information. No other record of Raymond Keller exists in any database, anywhere. The security contractor brought his findings to supervisors. The response was swift and unusual. The archived footage was reclassified. The contractor was reassigned. And a quiet investigation was conducted that lasted 3 months and produced no public conclusions. But the contractor had already made copies. He shared them with a small community of researchers who subjected the footage to exhaustive analysis. The 2007 footage was authentic. The 1959 photograph was authentic. And the man in both was, as far as any expert could determine, the same person separated by nearly 5 decades without a single sign of aging. The contractor's obsession with the case cost him his career and his marriage. He became convinced that Raymond Keller wasn't a time traveler in the traditional sense, but something else entirely, someone unstuck from linear time, appearing at the same location across different decades like a stone skipping across a pond. He spent years searching for other appearances. He found one, a newspaper photograph from 1931 showing a crowd gathered for the opening of a new rail terminal in the same district of Chicago, where O'Hare would eventually be built. In the crowd, barely visible, a man in a dark coat holding a leather briefcase. Same face, same posture, same pin on the lapel. 3 appearances across 76 years. The same man in the same coat with the same briefcase, and not a single sign of aging that anyone can explain. The contractor has since gone silent. His research files were reportedly seized during a break-in at his home. Who is Raymond Keller? Why does he keep appearing at the same location across different decades? And what's in that briefcase that he's been carrying for at least 76 years? The next case is one of the most emotionally devastating on this list. Number 3, the home movie ghost. This case involves a family's personal home movie footage from 1967. And the little girl who appears in the background of that footage is the spitting image of a child who wouldn't be born for another 42 years. The child's mother discovered the footage, and the realization of what she was looking at unraveled her completely. Imagine you're digitizing your late grandmother's home movies as a gift for your mother's birthday. Hours of footage from the 1960s showing birthday parties, holiday dinners, a young family growing up in suburban New Jersey. Then your 4-year-old daughter walks into the room, looks at the screen, and says something that stops your heart. She points at a little girl in the background of a 1967 barbecue and says, "That's me." She's right. The child in the 1967 footage, partially visible behind a group of adults, looks exactly like your daughter. Not vaguely, exactly. The same curly red hair, the same round face, the same way of standing with one foot turned slightly inward. That's what happened to Catherine Brewer in 2011. And what followed sent her into a spiral that she never fully escaped. Catherine's daughter Lily was born in 2007. The footage was filmed in 1967, 40 years before Lily existed. In approximately 7 seconds of footage, a child who appears to be around 4 years old is visible in the background of a backyard gathering at her grandmother's house. The child is not interacting with anyone. She's standing alone near a fence, looking directly at the camera with an expression that Catherine described as recognition. Catherine's grandmother had been dead for 8 years. There was no one alive who could identify the child. Catherine checked every family record she could find and identified every person at the gathering. The child in the background did not match any known family member, neighbor, or friend from that period. Catherine had a forensic imaging specialist enhance and age progress the child's face. The result was, according to the specialist, statistically indistinguishable from an actual photograph of Lily taken at the same age. But what disturbed Catherine most wasn't the physical resemblance. It was Lily's behavior. Her daughter had always had an unusual familiarity with the grandmother's house, even though it had been sold before Lily was born. Lily described rooms correctly that she'd never visited. She knew there had been a tire swing in the backyard. She knew the kitchen wallpaper had been yellow with small flowers. All of this was accurate to the 1960s, long before any renovation had changed the house. Catherine became consumed by the idea that her daughter had somehow been present at that barbecue in 1967. She began questioning Lily obsessively. Lily responded with answers that were either impossibly lucky guesses or evidence of something Catherine couldn't accept. Lily said the people at the barbecue couldn't see her. She said she was watching them, but they looked through her like she wasn't there. She said it was sunny and the grass was wet and someone was cooking meat on a fire, all consistent with the footage. Catherine withdrew from her job, her friends, her husband. She spent every hour researching temporal displacement, past life memory, anything that might explain what she was seeing. The marriage ended in 2013. Catherine received partial custody of Lily. But the obsession had already done its damage. She had lost the ability to see her daughter as simply her daughter. Every time she looked at Lily, she saw the ghost in the 1967 footage. Lily was eventually placed fully in her father's custody. Catherine lives alone now, walls covered with printed stills from the footage. She has told the few friends who remain that she just wants to understand how her daughter ended up in a home movie filmed 40 years before she was born. Was the child in the footage really Lily? Is there some mechanism by which a consciousness can appear in a time it doesn't belong to? And why was the child looking at the camera with recognition, as though she knew she was being recorded and knew exactly who would eventually watch? The next case involves the most extensive evidence yet. Number 2. The Archive Walker. This case involves not one photograph, not one film, but 23 separate historical images spanning 140 years, all showing the same woman, a woman who is alive today and is 36 years old. The collection was assembled by a historian who spent 6 years matching the face across archives on 3 continents. When he presented his findings, he was discredited, and his research was confiscated. But copies survived, and what they show is impossible. Imagine you're a historian specializing in photographic archives. You've spent your career cataloging faces in old photographs, building databases, cross-referencing images across collections. It's meticulous, unglamorous work. Then your facial recognition software flags something unusual, a face that appears in photographs from 1879, 1903, 1921, 1944, 1962, and 2019. Same woman, same face, no aging between the oldest and newest images. That's what Dr. Emilio Vasquez encountered in 2020, and by the time he finished assembling the complete collection, he had 23 photographs spanning from 1878 to 2019, showing what appeared to be the same individual. He also had a name. The woman was alive, living in Lisbon, 36 years old, and she had no idea she appeared in photographs from the 19th century. Her name was Inés Ferreira. She was a pharmacist with no connection to historical archives and no interest in the paranormal. He showed her the photographs in chronological order. The earliest, from 1878, showed a woman at a market in Porto. The most recent, from 2019, was a street photograph taken during a festival in Lisbon that Inés confirmed she had attended. Between these two endpoints, 21 additional images showed the same face in locations across Portugal, Spain, France, and Brazil. The woman in the photographs didn't age. She didn't change. In every image across 140 years, she appeared to be exactly the same age, somewhere in her mid-30s. Her clothing changed with each era, always appropriate to the period, but her face remained constant. The same dark eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same faint line across her forehead that Inés could trace with her fingertip on her own face. Inés initially thought it was a joke. Then she studied the photographs more carefully, and her composure collapsed. She said she had spent the night unable to sleep because she recognized locations in the photographs that she had dreamed about her entire life. A market in Porto she had never visited, a church in São Paulo she had no reason to know, a bridge in Paris she had sketched repeatedly as a child without knowing why. Vasquez tried to publish his findings. Every journal rejected them. His university distanced itself from his research. His apartment was broken into, and his primary hard drives were taken. But he had already distributed copies to trusted colleagues. Inés's psychological decline was slower, but no less devastating. She became convinced that she was trapped in a cycle, that her consciousness had been repeating across centuries, and that the photographs were evidence of previous iterations. She stopped going to work. She told Vasquez in their last conversation that she had begun remembering things that hadn't happened yet, and that the memories felt old, as if she'd remembered them before, in a previous version of her life. Vasquez has not been able to reach her since 2022. Her pharmacy was closed. Her apartment is occupied by new tenants who say they have no knowledge of the previous occupant. 23 photographs across 140 years. One face, one woman who may have been living the same life over and over, appearing in the historical record like a watermark on the pages of time. Is Inés Ferreira immortal? Is she caught in a loop? Or is something else happening entirely, something that our understanding of time has no framework to explain? The final case is the most disturbing of all. Number 1, the man in every frame. This is the case that researchers refer to as the most compelling evidence of temporal displacement ever assembled. It doesn't involve one person finding one photograph. It involves hundreds of people across dozens of countries finding the same man in historical footage from every era since the invention of the camera. And the man himself has been found. He is alive. He is 42 years old, and he has no memory of appearing in any of the images. Imagine waking up one morning to find that your face has gone viral. Not because of something you did, but because people around the world have identified you in historical photographs and film footage spanning over 170 years. You're in a daguerreotype from 1851. You're in the background of newsreel footage from 1928. You're in a crowd watching the Kennedy motorcade in 1963. You're in satellite news coverage from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And in every single image, you look exactly the way you look right now. That's what happened to a man identified only as James in early 2023, when an online community dedicated to historical anomalies began connecting the dots across dozens of archives. James was a postal worker living in Bristol, England. He had no public profile, no social media presence, no reason for anyone to recognize his face. But his face, as it turned out, was one of the most photographed in human history. He simply hadn't been alive for most of it. The collection grew to over 200 verified images, each one authenticated by the institution that held it, each one showing a man matching James with a facial similarity score above 99%. He appeared in photographs from London, New York, Tokyo, Cairo, Buenos Aires, and dozens of other cities across wars, celebrations, disasters, and ordinary street scenes. He was always in the background, always observing, never the subject. In some images, he appeared to be looking directly at the camera. In others, he was turned slightly away, as if aware of being captured and trying to avoid it. But the face was always the same. The build was always the same. And in every image, he appeared to be approximately 40 years old. When journalists tracked James down, he was bewildered. He had no explanation. He had never traveled extensively and had never experienced missing time or strange dreams. He was, by every measure, an ordinary man living an ordinary life. But the discovery destroyed that life completely. He was inundated with attention from researchers, conspiracy theorists, and government agencies. He received threats from people who believed he was an agent of some temporal authority. He received letters from people who claimed to have seen him in person in decades past. James went into hiding within months. But reports of his face appearing in historical archives haven't stopped. New matches continue to be discovered regularly, now stretching back to the 1840s, the very dawn of photography. The psychological toll on James has been immense. He is reportedly unable to function normally, unable to trust his own sense of time, unable to look at a photograph without wondering if he's in it. He has told the handful of people still in contact with him that he sometimes forgets which year it is, that the past and present have begun to blur together in his mind, and that he's started to wonder if he's ever been just one person at all. Is James a man unstuck from time, scattered across history without his own knowledge? Is he somehow present at every major event, a silent witness to human history who doesn't know he's witnessing it? Or is something using his image, his face, his identity, placing it throughout the historical record for reasons that no one, least of all James, can comprehend? And here's the question that makes this case the most terrifying of all. If James has been appearing in photographs since the 1840s, and he has no memory of it, then who is controlling where and when he shows up? 10 travelers, 10 impossible pieces of evidence. Each one found footage of themselves in a time they couldn't have existed, and each one was broken by the discovery. Maybe the past isn't as sealed as we think it is. Maybe time leaves traces, echoes of people who wandered into the wrong century and left their image behind like a fingerprint on a window. Or maybe there's a simpler and far more terrifying explanation. Maybe we've all been somewhere before, and somewhere in a dusty archive, in a photograph you'll never see, your own face is staring back at you from a century ago, waiting for you to find it. Sleep well.